Welcome to MidLIFE Matters, where we celebrate women's wisdom and wit. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Jeannette Varkal. Jeannette is a successful businesswoman and describes herself as a world wanderer. She has an MBA, and she's a Chartered Life Underwriter. Welcome, Jeannette.
Thank you.
So you built a career in the insurance world where there weren't many women at the executive level. You think of yourself, you were a go-getter, and heard maybe someone referenced you as like a woman to watch. What do you assess were the main factors that helped you be successful in a time when not a lot of women were doing that?
I arrived at a time when big corporations were just starting to realize that women were there and the law was there. So maybe they should take a second look. And then myself, I'm a person who's looking for challenges. I walked into a particular job, and I worked really hard at it. I was in there extra time. I didn't get overtime. Never wasn't looking for. I was just looking to get the job done.
Yeah.
And so I guess that was rather unusual. And so they took notice. When apparently the executive level were looking to identify certain persons, and I was identified to go to the University of Oklahoma to spend a couple of weeks there for what they called at the time charm school. What that was is to maybe give you a little bit of veneer to train you to do well in meetings, to communicate effectively, to be able to stand up and give a presentation. It was extremely interesting. Worked very hard there.
And what was the type of work you were doing at this time?
When I started with the Travelers, I was brought into the area that was doing underwriting for retirement plans. I didn't know about retirement plans, but with my background in accounting, it was pretty easy for me to pick up. So yeah, I learned the retirement plans business. And when it came time to beef up automation, which was really going on big time, of course we were still doing punch cards, I was kind of tapped to lead it into automation. So I was brought in. They had bought a new software, and I had to translate all of the corporation's rates and actually the rate manual onto the software. And then the software would do the computations to calculate out with actuarial factors, mathematics, the sale of retirement plans.
So you had a degree in accounting when you came?
I did. I'm extremely thankful that I studied accounting. Accounting is really the language of business. With a degree in accounting, you can move in and out of any industry.
Okay. And then what did you do next?
So from there, again, the business plan was to increase automation and to then train technicians, clerks, how to use the system. And so that's what I did next. And then after a couple of years, they decided to move into a new software package, much more sophisticated. So I was asked to put together the proposals that went out to software firms. And that's basically where it all started to move ahead. And I did that for about 10 years.
Okay.
Then I married my coworker.
All right.
And at the Travelers, two people who are married cannot work for the same vice president. So one of us had to move. And my late husband had been with that department for many, many years, so I elected to move. Because at this time, now I was in graduate school, I was getting my MBA. I moved to the property casualty area, and I spent the next 15 years in the property casualty area. And there, things really took off because my MBA work was in really comptrollership. And so I was tapped to become the quote-unquote expert in controls, financial and operational controls. And that's pretty much what I did in the property casualty area. And then after a while, I was exported to other departments in the Travelers to do the same type of work.
And I had worked at Travelers as well, and Aetna. There are a lot of opportunities in large organizations to transfer skills.
Yes.
And I certainly had a lot of rich experiences as well. Once started with, writing pension contracts.
Yes.
And when ERISA was, was
Yes,
in the late
yes.
mid-70s or whatever.
Absolutely.
Then I ended up going into human resources. But again, a lot of different, you could be in corporate, you could be in the business units.
Yep.
And so it was a very rich development
Oh, yes.
environment, I
Oh,
would
yes.
say, as an HR person.
Yes.
And when did you go to the summer academy in the UK?
Oh, that was in 1999, and I had been looking at that for a couple of years because in Summer Academy was being offered at a number of universities in Europe, and I elected to I wanted to go to Oxford University, and that's where this was given, and the theme there was the art and architecture of Oxford, and that's what we studied. It was
Okay.
extremely eye-opening.
So art and architecture.
Of Oxford.
Okay. So it wasn't in the business realm so much.
No, because, well, you see, I'm also a frustrated artist.
Okay.
I do a great deal of studying in art history, and when I was in 8th grade, some of my work was exhibited at the Wadsworth.
Nice.
It was a scholastic arts contest. I remember my father was so proud. He brought the whole family. It was actually today it's called the Avery Court, the section of the Athenaeum, which is the Avery Court. My piece hung in there.
Nice.
My father, my sisters and the family just walked back and forth looking at my piece of art.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I was in high school, also, my art teacher had me do an Egyptian mural
Nice.
from a book. I never really finished it. I didn't have the time, but it was started. Studying accounting is the other side of the
Yes,
brain.
art and science.
Right. So therefore, the art kind of went by the wayside, and I studied art history rather than producing art. And I did the accounting route.
Yeah. Okay. Then at some point, so you've been now in business like 25 years, correct? 10 years and then
Oh, yeah.
15
Yep,
years. You got what you said was one of the best things ever, which was the golden handshake.
Absolutely.
So talk about that.
Absolutely. This was a time when the Travelers was going through its transition. Citi had bought the company pretty much. I was given a wonderful financial package, took it, and I was sent to a fancy outplacement firm who wanted me to move into another large corporation, perhaps at an upper level. And I said, no, I really want to go into consulting. And eventually I did. I only had about a 4 months kind of a layover in between the Travelers and my first consulting assignment. And I just hung in there for 15 years. It was wonderful.
So tell what some of the differences were of being a consultant versus working
It's a whole different
in-house.
world, whole different world. You're working in a large corporation, there's so much undertow in politics, but when you're in consulting, they want you there to do the job. Do you have the skills? If you have the skills, pretty much that's what they're looking for. Sometimes a little different, but more or less. And so you get into the consulting job, you understand what the goal is. When the job is done, if you like it and they offer you an extension, you stay. If you're bored, if you would prefer to learn something different, you'd prefer a different environment, you just move on. And you never have to explain. No excuses, no explaining.
So what type of companies or industry did you work for?
I worked for all the insurance companies in Hartford. I worked for a software house. I had a software contract with AIG down on Wall Street, spent some time down there. At one time, I thought I'd like to work in New York City. I'd like to work in Manhattan. Thank God I didn't do it. It's a tough world, really tough world. A lot of money, but you earn it. I work for software houses and insurance companies. I work for the Hartford. I work for in all lines of business, life insurance, workers' compensation. I went to some workers' compensation conferences in South Florida. Wonderful. I mean, it was a wonderful learning experience. I could not have learned what I learned if I had stayed in one company.
In one
ever.
company,
No,
yes.
no. For 15 years.
And you shared with me that at one point when you were working on Wall Street, what time did you get up in the morning to meet the
3
car?
in the morning, so that
Okay.
there was a group of us. We went down as a team, and so the limo picked us up at 4. We had to be there for 8 o'clock meetings on Lower Manhattan.
Okay. And so you found that world. About how long did you work, say, in the New York area?
On and
Wall
off
Street.
for about 2 years, but not steady. Not
Yeah.
steady. The limo came back to Hartford every night.
Yeah.
Every night. Yeah. And we were so happy when the limo was heading north.
Oh, I bet, right?
Oh, yeah.
Get back to the land of steady habits.
Right.
Okay. And then in your early 40s, you lost your husband.
My husband passed away when I was 44.
Okay.
And he died from his third heart attack. Mm-hmm. Missed him terribly. And we have no children. Mm-hmm. It was a shock. Even though he'd had 2 heart attacks, he was not expected to die. He died. He was 54. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, I had to run our big house by myself, and I had to do everything by myself. I had at one time, I was settling 3 estates, his father's, his, and mine. I had to redo mine.
Yeah.
So I was very, very busy. Basically, my work is where my salvation was. Mm-hmm. And I got myself a little poodle.
Okay.
And so he kind of helped. Mm-hmm. And eventually you evolve. It took a long time, but eventually you evolve.
And we've talked about what? Your work really helped. Having a pet helps. Were there people in your life that you can remember that were particularly instrumental? I know you had mentioned to me one time you didn't know other people who had lost
Well, not women.
a
Women
spouse.
at my age were not widows
Right,
yet.
Right.
Actually, there was no one person. But at the time, believe it or not, before I became an officer at the Travelers, I was a part-time real estate agent.
Okay.
And I used to do what they called floor time. And I went through so many months of sadness, serious sadness. But one day when I was doing floor time, I was sharing the task with another real estate agent, and this woman was funny. She was extremely funny. So when we were just laughing so hard, I felt so much better. And that was a turning point. I said, I can laugh again. It was really, I was rejoining the world. But it was not one. It really was not one person.
Yeah.
It was basically the fact that I could really laugh again. And to this day, I have never stopped laughing.
Wonderful. And I know one thing that you talked about was at the point where you decided to stop consulting, working in that way, your dad had given you some advice. So tell us about that.
Oh, he said, Jeannette, it's time to smell the roses.
Yeah.
And that Fred was in my life, my partner. After my mom passed away, my father and I traveled. He loved to travel. And so we did that. And after he could no longer, he died at the age of almost 96.
Okay.
And then after that, Fred and I started traveling.
So tell us about
And we've
your
never
trips.
stopped.
All right. And so about what year was that?
We took some trips as early as 2003, and then after that, it was pretty much every year, different
Okay.
kind. We used to do elder hostels, and they were wonderful. I did about 12 of those. We did interesting things on that, and then we started to do cruises. Well, in 2008, we took. What I did is I booked a flight to Rome. I booked a hotel to Rome. I'd studied the map of Rome. And so we just went. This is what we did. No other plans. I used to travel like that previously. That's when the euro was $1.50 for €1. Well, we had a good time in Rome, but we decided that we probably could do better and see more if we went on cruises.
Okay.
So then we switched to cruising. We've done about 25, 30 cruises.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Every year, sometimes twice a year.
And what are some of the favorite memorable trips?
Oh my, we've done a lot. Actually, we did one 6 months ago. We were in the Eastern Mediterranean. We flew into Rome and got on a ship in Rome, just north of Rome, and we we did some Italy. We went into Sicily, and then we headed over to Greece. From Greece, went into Turkey. Been to Turkey 3 times. I love Turkey. And then we went into Israel. And we did a couple of ports in Israel, and then flew back to New York from Israel, from Ben Gurion Airport.
So do the cruises arrange an itinerary for you, or do you tend to go off on your own once you get to a certain place?
No, I would never do that because you're in a strange country and you never know if you're safe.
Right.
So the cruise lines put together excursions. My excursions are booked before I leave home.
Okay.
And then it's just, I follow the group. But I did find out when I went to the islands of Greece, they're all mountainous. Some of those mountains, I should have climbed them 30 years ago.
Okay. All right. So age becomes a factor at some point.
Oh
Yeah,
yes.
in
So
terms of
now,
determining.
yeah, we're going on another cruise in 4 months. Now I'm looking at the level of activity.
Yeah, that's
Because-
required.
Yes. And, I don't feel too badly because we met a gentleman on our last cruise who was at least 15 years younger, and he was saying the same thing. And I said, okay, well,
Yeah.
so I guess I've earned it.
Yeah, you have earned it. And so you study things before you go, and you see
Absolutely.
it as really a continuation of being a lifelong learner.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, our travels for me, it's all education. And I've already started to study on our next because the next one is going to the British Isles.
Okay.
So we'll be going to England, which we've been to multiple times, Ireland, which we've been to twice, but never to Scotland.
Okay.
So that should be
Nice.
interesting.
And speaking of kind of that end of the world, you grew up in Canada.
I did.
Your
I was
early years.
was born in Nova Scotia, and from there, actually, the family's from New Brunswick.
Okay.
Born in Nova Scotia, that happens to be where my father was working when I came into the world. And eventually, when I was 10, my father moved the family to Connecticut, and I'm still here.
Okay. And so what are some of the influences you think that Canadian start in life have had on you?
Well, Canada, being a member of the British Commonwealth, has a different flavor. I know culturally they look the same, but they're not.
Okay.
As a little Canadian girl, I was brought up to be quite a lady. You sat very nicely in your chair, and you were never rowdy. You did not interrupt the adults, and so I would have to say, when I moved to the United States, I found that I didn't find the same thing.
Okay.
It made me kind of shy.
Well, I mean, you were, I think, in 5 different elementary schools?
Yeah, though that's because of the moving around.
Yeah.
But that was okay. Actually, I learned to easily move around.
Okay.
It never bothered me to. I never become totally. Well, maybe I do now, but totally attached to any particular place. I can move if I want to.
Okay.
If to follow my dreams.
Nice. And that makes me think a little bit of people who, well, they're called army brats, right?
Oh yeah.
Who their family's moving quite a bit. Different reason, but they have to learn to acclimate pretty quickly, size things up. And you do think how old were you when you came to the States?
10.
Okay. So you're pretty well established as a little person at that point.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Now I have 2 sisters younger. One 4 years younger than I, and then one 8 years younger than I. Both of them. One was 6. One was 18 months. They became more true Americans than I did.
Okay.
I don't, to this day, don't consider myself 100% American.
Yeah, well, sure.
I'm still a little bit like my first cousins that are still in Canada. Primarily, all of our relatives are Canadian.
Okay.
Very few are in the United States, or at least in this area.
I have relatives in Canada. My maternal grandmother lived on the Canadian border in North Dakota, and one of her sisters went back to Canada. She ended up going with the whole family moved to California at some point. So I have an email communication with a second cousin, I guess, my generation, and he's so polite and flowery language, and that's kind of my little experience with the Canadian way, if you will. I notice he's a little more formal and
Yes.
yes.
Yes. Yep.
So that's very enriching, I'm sure. So you've served on several boards. You and I serve on CW Resources, where I had a nice opportunity to meet you and work with you, as well as the Friends of the Library of New Britain.
Yes.
What do you find? Those are volunteer activities.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And like 30 years you've been doing some of
Both
this?
of those, yes.
Okay.
When I turned 50, I decided, I've got to start giving. I've got some skills that might be useful. So I ended up with both of those. I did other organizations. It sort of didn't work out, but it worked out with these two, and I'm still there.
That's
I'm still
wonderful.
there.
Yeah. And so for anyone considering joining a board, could you describe a little bit of what it involves?
First of all, you are there to learn and then to make a contribution. People who join boards for what they can get out of it, it's more what can you give. And so that's pretty much what I have to say, and that's pretty much what I've been doing.
So I know at CW you're on the governance committee, so using all those MBA skills and all your consulting skills and your business skills. You're on the HR committee, which I'm delighted. So we get to work on issues of how people and technology and goals intersect, right? And so I imagine with Friends of the Library, kind of a similar experience for you?
I've been treasurer for 30 years.
Oh my goodness, they're definitely using your accounting skills.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. When you're with a group for that length of time, you see a lot of change. CW has really thrived. The Friends of the Library, not so much.
Okay.
Younger people are not becoming involved. If you've been with something for 30 years, well, naturally, you're aging. And my colleagues on these boards, that one, are either my age or older. So, you know, we're all doing the work, but we're not as vibrant as we used to be.
Okay.
Let's just call it
And
what
I
it
know
is.
boards are challenged with attracting young talent.
Yes.
And people that can get involved in things and learn over time. So that's a phenomena that I guess, you know, is shared across with, regardless of the size of the organization perhaps, or,
Yes, I know churches are having the same problem, unfortunately. Now, for many, many years, over 30 years, I was with the Business and Professional Women's Club of Hartford.
okay.
I was president for a number of years, intermittently, and eventually that group could no longer find people to become officers.
Okay.
I mean, by default, I became president when I really didn't care to be president
Yeah.
anymore, but they couldn't find anybody else, so I would carry on. Eventually, it folded.
Okay.
After, oh heavens, this started in 1919,
Ooh.
right when the women got the vote.
Okay.
And then it's disbanded in the 1990s.
Okay. So it maybe was a matter of women found their place in business and maybe didn't feel as much of a need to form a group to help
Exactly.
push forward or
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. That group, interestingly, helped me personally to develop some of my leadership skills outside of the corporation.
Yeah.
Because the corporation was more stifling
Okay.
as an environment.
Yes. Yes, insurance is pretty staid.
Yes.
Yes, or by nature it can be. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, because it's risk averse. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, has risk aversion. Okay.
Yes.
It's risk adverse. So let's think about, and we're talking about aging and so forth. So as we age, we get the opportunity to reflect, you know, think about how we got to where we are, so how some key decisions and influences have affected us. So what advice would you give, say, your 25-year-old self?
Work hard to know what you want and persevere. And know yourself.
Okay. That's not necessarily the easiest thing, is it?
No, it's not.
Because the world may be telling you something different.
Exactly. And your friends and even your family.
Yeah. And what about more in your 40s? Now, that's when you went through a lot of transition, losing your husband, etc.
Yeah, well, you know, I'll tell you, after my husband passed away, I thought my life was going to revert to what it was as a single woman,
Okay.
but you don't go backwards. So I was a different person, and so you never go back. You just have to keep moving forward. And actually, I went back to school. I took on more job responsibilities. Eventually went into a lot of volunteer work.
So you grew.
Exactly.
Wonderful. And do you have a favorite quote or mantra?
No, just basically be true to yourself.
Wonderful. Follow your dreams. You've done all your traveling. You have all your
Well, you know,
accomplishments.
all the years that I was working, I always dreamed of going on cruises.
Wonderful.
For some reason, I wanted to go on cruises out of Rome, and we've done multiple.
Good for you.
I think Fred is sick of cruising, but he still goes because the food is good.
All right. There you go. Thank you so much. This has been delightful, Jeannette.
Well,
Thanks
thank
for
you so much for
sharing
having
and
me.
inspiring women coming along. And please tune in to hear other fascinating women on future segments of Midlife Matters. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and thank you for joining us.